if you recall, the last couple weeks, Jesus has been having this this confrontation, I think is the best way to call it. He's been having this confrontation with the Pharisees, and we've been noting that the last few stories have been taking place in the temple, which is significant because we've had these conflicts, these skirmishes that kind of arise periodically where the Pharisees, they come and they have a squabble with Jesus. They usually argue with him. They try to get some information out of him. They say things like, does your rabbi fast? Does he, pay the temple tax like we're going to see tonight? And they're trying to catch him. But in the last couple chapters, Jesus has actually gone to them. So he's gone into the temple, and now these things are happening on their turf where they have power, they have authority, and they have the crowd kind of more or less on their side. And so what's interesting to me is that Jesus' tone has not changed. He is comfortable with who he is and his mission, whether it's in the countryside, whether it's down by the Jordan River, or standing in the temple. Jesus has come to speak truth. And so the last few weeks, I think we've noticed that Jesus has used this style of teaching, the parable, and he's turned it onto the Pharisees. He's been using parables to direct and confront the Pharisees for the very first time. And the last few parables that we've read are, I can't remember the technical term, but more or less what they are inviting the people who are hearing to think of themselves as part of the story. So who remembers what we learned last week? Anybody remember the stories? Sheesh. So we had the parable of the sons. You remember this? And so these parables are an invitation to the Pharisees to see themselves in the story. And do you remember their reaction when it clicks with them that he's talking about them? What is their reaction? I see baring teeth. You guys are a quiet bunch. They get upset. They get frustrated, and ultimately they want to kill him. Tonight, Jesus is going to begin to teach a parable, but he's going to kind of shift, I think, the strategy. Instead of inviting the Pharisees to see themselves, I think Jesus is going to be a little bit more straightforward and say, this is who you are. There are going to be those at the judgment who are in and those who are out. And this language makes us uncomfortable in the 21st century, but it's just part of the Christian faith, that there is a judgment. That is part of the scriptures. And Jesus is letting them know that if you continue, you will be on the outside looking in. And so, with that being said, I think if we read it, we're going to be able to see this kind of unfold and come to life. So let's start at chapter 22, verse 1. And again, Jesus spoke to them, so he's speaking to the Pharisees again, in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his sons. And he sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. I don't know about you, but I'd be hesitant to accept a dinner invite with the word slaughter on it. You know what I mean? Hey, you should come on over. We're going to slaughter a pig. I hope you do that way before I get there. Okay, so fat calves have been slaughtered and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention, and they went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. So this theme is emerging, right? This happened in the last parable as well, the vineyard. What is the imagery that Jesus is evoking? What is he actually talking about?
Pharisees and the Jewish people that are rejecting him.
And who are the servants that were sent? The prophets. So Jesus is saying, listen, there has been all kind of mixed reaction to the prophets. They've been sent to you for generations. Some of you were just apathetic, like, meh, you can do what you want. I'm going to go about my business. On one end, the other end is you violently kill them. You remember this from last week. Jesus teaches the parable of the vineyard, and they beat and kill some of the servants, and then the master says, well, surely they won't do what? Kill my son. So he sends his son, and what do? They kill him. So what Jesus is doing is he's nailing down their history. I think Jesus is speaking into their lives, knowing full well that they know the scriptures inside and out. And so Jesus is appealing to something that they should know, and here's what he's appealing to. For generations, the prophets have been sent to you, And you and people like you have been rejecting them over and over and over. Now this is the weekly rant where I tell you that we should be careful to think that if a prophet was sent to us that we would just 100% get it, right? We should be careful to say, oh, well, if the prophets came to our doorstep, we would have recognized them for who they were, and we would have repented and turned. We would have done better than the Pharisees. I think how Matthew is telling the story is an invitation for us to see that we have Pharisee in us. So he says, some were treated shamefully and some were killed. Verse 7, the king was angry and he sent his troops and he destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out into the roads, and they gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. Okay, the story will continue in a second, but I think this is plenty for us to chew on for a while. Okay, so let's talk about weddings. You probably know that this is not the first time or the last that Jesus, and especially the New Testament, talks about weddings. So what do you know about a first century Jewish wedding? Just anything, just shoot it out here. What do you know about first century weddings?
Multiple days.
Multiple days, so yeah, multiple days long.
Lots of wine.
Yeah. Wine galore, is that a good way to say this? Wine galore. I think in certain sects of Judaism, when a bride and groom are like coming to be married, the first thing they do before they even speak to each other is drink wine. Then after their vows, they drink another glass of wine. And then when they go back to like their wedding bed, they drink wine. So yeah, wine galore. Anything else you know about a first century wedding?
Lots of people.
Lots of people, yeah. Did you say something, Ricardo?
Lots of ritual.
Lots of ritual.
For a year.
Say that again?
They've been prepared for a year for the engagement.
Yeah, lots of preparation. Yeah, we know that from a lot of times that gets taught with Mary and Joseph, right? There's like a betrothal period where they're pledged, legally they're married, but they take a year before they consummate their marriage and have the ceremony. So lots of preparation. Anything else you can think of? Yeah. Yeah.
You just say, hey, we're getting married on April 1st, or whatever. So that's why we send out.
Yeah. Exactly. There's lots of reasons too.
They send out is because it's not the best. We don't get the weddings until the
Yeah, exactly. You know, like we'll say we'll make a joke at a wedding like that the bride's not going to walk down the aisle. It says 1 p.m. She's not going to walk down till at least 1:15, right? And we think like, oh, what an inconvenience, 15 minutes late. In the ancient world, what you're saying is more like this. We anticipate that we will be having a marriage and a wedding in the spring. That's it. And the reason for that is a lot. Number one, we got to wait for the harvest to know like when the season is going to come. You don't want to plan a huge wedding during the harvest because you can't pick between the two. You have to harvest, right? The other big reason is there's no such thing as refrigeration. So like when food is ready, food is ready. You got to fatten up that calf before you slaughter it, right? So there's lots of reasons for this. Anything else you can think of?
Are they arranged marriages?
Yes. Yep. They're arranged. Okay, so let's add some context to weddings here. Let's just launch off on the idea of the time. So basically how a first century wedding would go is like this. It would be a big generic kind of save the date. So in this particular parable, who is hosting the wedding? Okay, a king. So is this going to be like a baller wedding or like a little wedding? Okay, this is going to be a big time wedding. This is like, I don't know how to say it. This is going to be a big wedding. If a king is hosting a wedding, this is going to be like the event of the year, right? What's one of these like British romance shows that everybody's watching? You know what I'm talking about? What are these shows called? Downton Abbey, yeah, that one. I've seen a little bit of it. So when they throw like one of these giant parties, this is what I'm picturing. Like Everybody's dressed up, big deal. So it's going to be a huge event. The king sends out his servants to do an invitation. Now, just like you said, this invitation is not specific to a time. This is, you are invited because the king anticipates throwing a wedding ceremony for who? His son. Now, is there significance here? The king's son is the first in line to become the... Okay, so this is a big deal. And if you get an invite, is this a big deal to you? Or it should be, right? It should be. Okay, I got to erase some of this because this is going to be fun. Okay, so a big generic invite would go out. And if you're a king, what you are doing in the ancient world, this is an honor and shame culture. Now, there's a challenge for a king, because a king already holds, as his position, already holds as much honor as you can get. Now, we've talked about this before, that if you're kind of, let's say that you own a chunk of land and you have a decent harvest, right? You really want to get to a position in the ancient world, because it's the only way to have any social mobility whatsoever, to maybe get invited to somebody who is a class above you. If you're invited to their home, they are saying to you that we recognize that you are worthy of honor. Does that make sense? So what kind of people does a king invite to a wedding?
The upper class.
What's that?
The upper class.
Upper class, yeah. So the well-to-do upper class, that's who should be getting. I would say it like this because I think there's mostly a spiritual component to this. I would call the king only invites the chosen people. So spiritually speaking, what are we talking about in this parable? Who is the king? God. Who does he invite to the wedding? Who are the first guests? The chosen ones, the Jews. Okay, so the king sends out this big generic invite saying the intention is a wedding in, let's say, the summer. So, if you receive this invitation, this is the process. You would basically say, okay, when the summer begins, we should have everything already pre-planned, ready to be packed and move. Because when the king comes and tells us that the date is nearing, he's going to tell us that we got 72 hours or 48 hours and the wedding is going to start. So it would be a secondary, more specific invitation. Does that make sense? Now, there is an insinuation that if the king invites you to a wedding, you notice that there's not a point where it says he's asking, hey, do you want to come or not? You notice that? It just says that they decide they're not going to come. The insinuation from every commentary that I read this week is that if you're invited to a royal wedding, the insinuation is that your answer is yes. Because the only thing that can happen in an honor and shame world is if the king is the highest status person, to be in his presence is to bring you and your family and everyone affiliated with you more honor. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is how it should go down. And then the event is supposed to be held. Now let's talk about what actually happens. So he sends the servants. The servants say, hey, there's going to be a wedding. And what does it say? But they would not come. Now, if you're reading this and you know how the ancient world works, and you know that there's honor and there's shame, you know to turn down a wedding invitation from the king is very shameful. So the first thing you know, if you're hearing this, is verse 3, he sent his servants to call those who were invited, but they would not come. So if you're thinking, I wonder what this is about, what is this teaching? The idea is these people have brought shame upon themselves and their families. Again, he sent other servants saying, tell those who are invited. So it's the same people. Going back to them. See, I have prepared my dinner and my oxen, and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. So which invitation is this? This is the second invitation. This is get ready, the time is coming. But they paid no attention. Some of them just went off to the farm, like I got work to do. Some of them went off to their business, while others seized the servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. So what is the image here? They all, in one way or another, brought extreme shame upon themselves. The king was angry. Why was the king angry? Because I'm the king, you don't say no to an open invitation to come under my household and my hospitality. So he destroyed those murderers and burned their city to the ground. Does it sound extreme to anybody? Does it? Okay, I think that in kind of the format of a parable, anytime you're here, whoa, pen down. Anytime you hear a parable and all of a sudden we just go from like, interesting, whoa, that's very aggressive, right? We should raise an eyebrow and think like, what else is going on here? So this parable is spiritual insight. It's a way of telling a story to give spiritual insight. So what is happening? What is meant by Jesus saying that the king is angry, so he sent his troops to destroy the murderers and burn their cities down? Yeah. So this is I think in nerd speak, this is a judgment parable. So the overarching theme is that there is a judgment, and we just reached it. And the judgment happens when? After the final invitation is given and you still refuse to come, what comes next? Judgment. So the king orders their city to be burned to the ground. Now this is very interesting because if you know biblical history or extra biblical history, you know that in the year 70 AD, you should write that down, that's like one of the most important dates in the ancient world. In the year 70 AD, the Roman government has had enough with this semi-autonomous region, including Jerusalem. They've decided, you know what, we've given them way too long of a leash. There's uprisings. We're constantly having to deal with these Jewish folks. And so they figure out that for the benefit of the empire, for the smooth collection of taxes and business running, they just decide no more special treatment for the Jews. And what do? They burn the city to the ground. They level the temple. They destroy the temple. The only thing actually remaining even to this day is what's called the Temple Mount, is the only part. The foundation and some of the original bottom stones are the only thing that's left of the entire structure. So that literally happens in real life. Okay, and then he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready. Like, we already started the preparations, right? The food is going to start coming out. Everything is prepared and ready for guests, but all the guests have declined to come. And so we have a problem, don't we? We have this enormous party being planned, and nobody is going to be here to enjoy the hospitality. So he tells them in verse 9, go into the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. So this is like, we're kind of in like local political season. How many of you have opened your mailbox and just found like so many mass mailers? This is like the mass mailer Facebook ad campaign of come to my wedding. By the way, this is very important because in this parable we're talking about a king throwing a wedding. That initial guest list is very important because in this culture of honor and shame, this is how this relationship works between people. The king's job is to provide the utmost hospitality. And it's not just a king, it's anybody who hosts a dinner party or has a business interaction with you. If they are in the position of power, their job is to offer hospitality to you. They are to give you their best. Does this make sense? Do you remember this story that we heard last week when we were talking about David and David and Nathan? Do you remember what Nathan says to David? He says there was a very wealthy man with so many sheep. Remember this? And then there was a poor man, and the rich man stole the poor man's sheep and used that for dinner, more or less. You remember this? What is the story saying? In this culture, the man who should be giving hospitality and honor has actually acted extremely shamefully. That's what's going on here. So the king is supposed to offer the best hospitality. Has he prepared to do that? Yes. The guests reciprocate the hospitality by coming, participating fully in what the king has intended, and then when they disperse, when they go back to the marketplace and the fields and the businesses that they belong to, they are supposed to go and they are supposed to bring honorable words to the reputation of the host, the king. Does that make sense to everyone? They have chosen not even to come. So what the king does next is actually a huge curveball. He has decided to make a decision that would actually bring what the culture would say is shame upon himself. He has done something that the culture would say, wait a second, that's a shameful decision. And what is the decision? To invite anybody. Don't screen them. Don't ask them what tax bracket they're in. Don't check what car they drive. Don't check which college they graduated to. It says just invite them all, as many as you can find. If they can walk and they can talk, invite them. This is a shame-bringing decision. It's a telling sign in this parable of what the king does. Culturally, he breaks all the norms and brings shame upon himself by the culture and does something that everyone would say like, ooh, what kind of king is this? And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. And so the wedding hall was filled with guests. Very interesting. If you're following along, you can just underline the phrase that I kind of piggybacked on is, what does it mean that they filled the hall with both bad and good? I'm going to erase so we can get a little more space here. Okay, so the question is, what does it mean by bad and good? I think this is Matthew's way of making sure that readers do not miss that this king just invited people into his home that qualify as bad. This is not a good, honor-bringing decision. He's just cast a wide net and brought them all in. Okay, let's pick this up in verse 11. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw that there was a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, "Friend, how on earth did you get in here without a wedding garment?" And he was speechless. The he in this is referring to the wedding guest with no garment, not the king. Then the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For when you come to a wedding, you should dress appropriately. For many are called, but few are chosen." Okay, so first it seems like the king has been shamed a little bit, so he burns a whole city down. And now a guest comes in and he's got the wrong clothes on, so he has him bound and thrown into the outer darkness. Anyone else reading this and thinking this is extreme? Okay, when you come to the Bible and you think, wow, the God of grace and forgiveness and love is being very extreme, you should scratch your head and think, there's probably something else going on here, right? That should be your first tip-off. If it feels in your gut like this doesn't feel like the character of God, then you should think there's probably something else going on here. So we're going to get there in a second, but let's kind of work our way down here. Okay, so the king comes in to look at his guests. And who are his guests? These are the good and the bad. This is the wide net was cast. They're all in there. And he sees a man who had no wedding garment. I love what he says. He says, friend. Do you see he calls him that? This is the same word. Do you remember the parable from a few chapters ago? It says that the master of the vineyard is looking for laborers, and he's like, hey, if you work a full day, I'll give you a denarius. Remember this? And then he finds more people. And if you work 9 hours, I'll give you a denarius, right? And he ends up paying everyone the same. And the people who work the full day are upset. They get paid last, and they say, hey, how come we don't get paid more? And what does he say to them? Friend, right? It's this word that says that we have some intimate relationship. We already know each other. Or we should already know each other. Or I know you, but you clearly, how you've acted or addressed me, you don't fully understand who I am. So he says, friend. Okay, let's talk about this idea of the wedding garment, because this is an important one. And I want to write this up here so we don't forget what we're kind of dealing with. By the way, this idea of honor and shame culture, can you think of a modern culture that kind of operates as more of an honor and shame culture today? What's that?
Muslim.
Yeah, Muslim culture for sure. A lot of Asian cultures still do as well. It's very interesting. In fact, I think I've referenced this a few times, but there was a study done a while back, and it was basically they took the story of Joseph. You guys know the story of Joseph, sold into slavery, goes to Egypt, famous story. And they basically took the story to Christians in various parts of the world, and they said, hey, just give us the basic summary of what this story is about. Have you already heard this before? In the Western world, so the United States, more or less people said that the story of Joseph is about no matter how far you fall, how low you get, if you work hard and you have integrity, you will rise to the top. Right? Now that is interpreted through a cultural lens of what? Individual. Does that make sense? Well, there's other countries, African countries and Asian countries read this story, and guess what they said it was about? They said that the story, the outcome of the story is no matter where you find yourself, no matter what fortune you get, the first thing you should always do is what? Take care of your family. Is that interesting? I'd say the second interpretation of that story is much more along with how the original hearers of the Bible were understanding these stories. It's about bringing honor to your family, to your community, to the people in your sphere of influence. Okay, so back to the wedding garment and why this matters. The wedding garment, it turns out, is not like you go into your closet and you think, I'm invited to a wedding. By the thickness of the invitation and the formality of the font on the invitation, it looks like a black tie affair or a little bit more casual. That's not how you dress for a wedding in the ancient world. Because I think it was David or Matt said, when you go to a wedding, we immediately think of a 45-minute ceremony followed by a 3 or 4 hour reception. In the ancient world, what is a wedding? It's days. If you're throwing a really good wedding, it might even be a week or more, right? So it's ongoing party and socializing. And so what you would do is you would just pack your clothing and you would go. And when it comes time for the wedding ceremony, the host, in this case it's the king, he provides the wedding garments. He provides what people wear. And in the Jewish culture in the ancient world, they were given a very simple white robe to wear over the top of their clothing. Everybody was uniform. There is a beautiful element of that, is it's kind of equalizing the playing field. Of, you know what, when the party starts, we're going to get to see the who's who and all of that stuff. But when the ceremony is going on, everybody is dressed the same. Is that kind of cool? And so the host provides the wedding garments. So it says, the king comes out and he's looking out into the hall. Presumably everybody's wearing their wedding garment except for one. Now there's a couple things you could ask yourself. Does this person not know that he should be wearing a wedding garment? Well, it's embedded in his culture. Maybe you're thinking, well, maybe he's never been to a wedding before. Why are you going to bind him and throw him into the outer darkness? It's so mean, right? Or you could say, well, if you're standing in a huge room full of everybody from an entire city being packed in there and you're the only one wearing a different outfit, you should probably pick up on this, right? I think what's going on is the Bible is pointing out in this honor and shame culture, the king is throwing a wedding. It's this beautiful event, and he's provided everything necessary. He's already described the feast that they're going to eat, right? He's openly given his full hospitality in this culture to people who don't deserve it and shouldn't belong at all. And all of a sudden we got a guy who's come in and decided he's not going to wear the wedding garment, or he doesn't have to. And so if you are the host of this wedding, when you see that, what do you see? Maybe you see disrespect. What else do you see?
Defiance.
What's that? Defiance, yeah. feel like you would see like an attempt to humiliate you in your own home, right? You're trying to undermine what you're doing. I wrote down a few other things. It's ultimately just a huge lack of giving the king his honor that he is due by hosting this event. And it says, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?" And the man was speechless. So why is he speechless? You're going to have to do more than mumble. It's a big room in here.
He has no defense.
He has no defense.
That's right, he knows he's wrong.
He knows he's in the wrong. And he just got called out by not another guest. He got called out by the king. Okay, so we got this issue here. So the king reacts in this kind of swift justice way. He has him bound, it says, hand and foot, and cast him into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. Okay, if you're already ahead and you're looking in the footnotes, you probably already know where this is going, because we've talked about the ins and outs of a wedding ceremony and kind of how the honor and shame culture worked. Now let's build the bridge to kind of spiritually what's going on here. So throughout the Bible, a garment, I'll put it in parentheses, is used to describe what? What's that? Yes, but I'm talking not physically, I'm talking spiritually. So how about this? For you are baptized and you put on Christ. Okay, so what does it mean to put on Christ? Does it mean you take some spiritual thing and you wear it? Kinda. But what does that mean?
You're different.
Yeah, you're different. So your garment, I think I put it in the footnotes here, is it's often an illustration for moral virtue. You can look up a couple of these. There's the white robe given to the saints in Revelation, right? It's the garment, right? We walk with the garment of praise, says Psalms. So there's all these illustrations that the garment you wear is the moral virtue that you have. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so I think what's going on here is this. It ends with, "For many are called, but few are chosen." Jesus has already said this, and I don't think this is a stretch. I think this is at the core of what this parable is about. A garment is your moral virtue. It's what comes from the state of your heart, right? It's your spiritual fruit. That's how the Bible describes this. We're on the same page? Okay, so spiritual fruit. So I think this is what Jesus would say. You will know them by their fruit. So the king spiritually comes out into the hall of his wedding feast, and what does he, as the judge, see? He sees that there are those who are wearing the proper garment, and there are those who are not. Does that make sense? That's what he is able to see. When I read this, I can't help but remember the parable that Jesus taught about the weeds and the wheat. Do you remember this? And he says, it's not your job to try to figure out what the weeds are and uproot them. I'm going to let them grow together, and then at the harvest time, I will separate the two. You remember that? And we actually, I have all of them right here. I could probably flip through and find. I actually put a literal picture in there, if I could find it. Yeah. This might be hard to see. That's the weeds and the wheat. Remember that? Can you guys kind of sort of see that? And the idea was that when they are young, before they are mature, ready to harvest, they look almost identical. But when harvest time comes, when the wedding feast is ready and it's time to harvest the spiritual fruit, then it becomes obvious which one is the weed and which one is the wheat. Does that make sense to everyone? So the idea that for many are called, what does that mean? Anybody who wants to come is welcome. Do you have to have the garment to accept the invitation? No. Apparently not. You don't have to have the garment, right? Do you have to have the garment to attend and stay? Yes. That's the whole image. So the image is at this time in this parable of judgment, when judgment begins, you didn't have to be wearing the garment when Jesus called you. You can come follow. But as you follow him, what is required? That the spiritual fruit of your life begins to grow and the harvest and the fruit becomes obvious, right? That's what's required, and that's what it means to wear the garment. Hang on, Millie, I'll call on you in a second. And if you want to follow Jesus and be resistant and hard of heart, can you do that? Yes. And when the time comes for the harvest and the one who judges over the harvest looks out, what does he see? You're not wearing the proper garment and you are cast out. Does that make sense? What were you going to say, Millie?
Well, Jesus said, how did you get in here?
Yeah.
You can't come in here unless you are ready and unless you are prepared.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. He literally would have had to have entered and forcefully said to the person handing out the garments in the parable, at least in the literal sense, "No, I don't want to wear that." Well, don't you know you're going to bring total shame upon the king? Yeah, I don't care. There's an element of pride and arrogance that I don't have to do that. And I think, who is he addressing this parable to? Hang on one second, Wanda. Who is he addressing the parable to? The Pharisees. Are they people who think they're invited to the wedding feast? Some of them have flatly refused. Some of them have decided, I'm going to go. And have they decided in their arrogance and pride that we don't have to do what he says? Yeah. I think he's inviting them and saying, that's you. Okay, what were you going to say, Wanda?
So I was going to say, it's the Pharisees that they think that because they're sons of Abraham, that they don't have to wear the garment, that they're already. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, excuse me, I just burped right as I was trying to, when you're mic'd up in a room with not that many people, it's hard to get away with a burp, so you might as well own it. So I wanted to share this illustration. I remembered it as I was preparing today after this was already printed out. I was thinking about this bound and thrown into the outer darkness. Now, I've said this before. I don't think the Bible ever once teaches like this super definitive, this is exactly what hell is and what it's all about. I think the Bible has all sorts of teachings that kind of come together in a thematic way that illustrate what hell or damnation is. But I was thinking about this outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I recalled a story that I was told. When I was a senior in college down in San Diego, I had a roommate who was in the Navy. He was training to be a pilot off of like an aircraft carrier. And through what he was doing, he met a friend, and this friend was going through the BUDS program in the Navy SEALs. Are you guys familiar with this at all? This is basically this period of time where you are not a Navy SEAL, but you are pretty much trying out. And they are just a step short of torturing you in every single way, trying to figure out who is the most hardened, mentally strong person. And I remember asking this guy, what was it like at your Hell Week? That's what it's called. Where for a whole week they get about 4 or 5 total hours of sleep, and it's just constant movement, go, go, go. And I remember him telling me the worst thing that ever happened to him. He said that they were doing this race that was like 3 hours long, and it included carrying a telephone pole among the 8 or 10 of them for a long period of time in the sand, and then getting in a boat and doing these crawls in the sand where their skin was getting ripped off in the sand, and it took hours. And he said, we were told that the first team to finish would come to the finish line, and they would be given 1 hour to sit back to back by a warm fire and sleep. Every other team would stand at just a far enough distance where they could see the fire and they could see the others sleeping, but they couldn't feel the warmth, and they had to stand at attention for 1 hour. And he said, my team came in second place by a couple of minutes, and that was the worst moment of my entire life. Sitting just far enough back to see them in their rest by the warm fire while chattering teeth, freezing cold at just a distance. And every time I read this, Cast into outer darkness in the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The idea of the outer darkness is you are far enough away where you're not participating in what's going on here, but you can see it. I always think of that. I think that's at kind of the core is you get to see the others celebrating with the king and the king honoring and bringing honor to them. And there's an element of you get to see it happen, but you're not participating in it because you've been cast out there. For many are called and few are chosen. I just wanted to wrap this section up here. I'd say the main points are this, is that I think Jesus, directed at the Pharisees, want them to know that your position and your status is not going to give you special grace at the judgment. I think just to bring it into like real, concrete 21st century terms, somebody with the word pastor in their title does not get some special treatment at judgment. They don't. I think Jesus is very clear. That is irrelevant. The title and the status thing doesn't matter at all. What will matter is the fruit. I think the second piece of this is you don't need the garment to be invited. You don't have to walk around and say that, oh, I'm Jewish, I'm a son of Abraham, therefore I just get an invite. I think what this parable is saying is the invite is a mass mailer. Everybody has the opportunity to come. You don't have to be wearing the garment when you accept the invite, but when the wedding feast starts, you need to be wearing the garment, and that is the fruit of the Spirit that comes out of your life. The last thing I think is this, is that that we can accept Jesus' offer, but there's a very real sense of the urgency that Jesus is teaching, that we can't take his grace for granted and forget that there is judgment, that everybody will see it. In fact, what are we in, 22? Matthew 25 is probably the biggest scene of judgment, the sheep and the goats. And that's going to be all about fruit, 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 fruit. To the point where the people who are included into the kingdom are going to say, when did we do the right thing? And what does he say? Whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And they're almost caught off guard, like, wow, we had no idea. We were just doing what we thought was right because we were following you, right? I want to skip ahead, but if you're interested, there's some, I just put a little chart that I kind of had created from some of my notes. These are, I think, sometimes we read these parables, and if we read them just 1 week and forget about what Jesus has already taught, we forget that he's actually already been building all of these themes up until this point. So I'll let you do that on your free time if you'd like. If you want to turn the page, I put a quote up there from a commentary, but I wanted to read this to you. This was written sometime between 50 and 70 AD by a very famous rabbi. And I just want to read it to you, and you can take it for what you will. This is very well documented in lots of places. One of the most famous contributors to the early Mishnah, which is like an ongoing living Jewish commentary. He was teaching his disciples. So apparently he had 5 disciples, and he was like one of the Harvards of Judaism. If you wanted him to be your rabbi, basically you had to be the very best of the best. So he's teaching his disciples, and this is what he taught them. Ecclesiastes 9:8 says, "Let your garment be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head." Yohanan told his disciples a parable based on this verse to explain why you must not delay repentance, but should always prepare to meet God. Listen to his illustration. This can be compared to a king who invited his servants to a banquet but did not tell them when it would be. The wise ones adorned themselves and sat at the entrance of the palace. They reasoned, "The palace lacks nothing needed for the banquet. It could occur at any time." The foolish ones just kept on working on other things. They reasoned, "What banquet doesn't require time to prepare?" Suddenly the king summoned his servants. The wise ones entered the palace beautifully adorned, but the foolish entered the palace dirty. The king happily greeted the wise ones, but angrily greeted the foolish. And he said, "Let the ones who adorn themselves for the banquet sit, eat, and drink. Let the ones who did not adorn themselves stand and watch." So you can be the judge. You can look it up. Might be an example of some early plagiarism going on here, but I just thought it just kept coming up in the things I was reading, and I just thought it was very fascinating. Anybody want to comment on it or say anything about it? Okay.
Do we know when Matthew was written? If this was, I guess if the Gospels had been written, would there be common knowledge of some parables and stuff?
We don't know for certain, like the exact date. We know for certain that Matthew had the Gospel of Mark at his disposal. So there's lots of theories and reasoning why, but basically no biblical scholar thinks that Matthew came before Mark. And it's almost unanimous that people believe that Mark was the first, and Luke and Matthew both had a copy of Mark. I'm not sure exactly when it was written down, but it had to be within 10, 20 years of Jesus' death. So that's what I would say.
Like if this guy were the stories of the gospel circulating, he would have that written down.
Okay, so I'll spare you a little bit of the drama. If you go online and look this up, there are two camps. One say this guy jacked Jesus' teaching. Then there is one school of thought who say, you see that range 50 to 70 AD? This guy was born in like the late 20s AD. So I was kind of being gracious with the 50 to 70. A lot of Jewish scholars want him to be a little bit older because they want there to be evidence that Jesus stole it from him. I would say even if Jesus stole it from him, it doesn't matter. The teaching still means exactly what it means. And frankly, Jesus' version is way more in-depth and beautiful than this. But they have a lot of commonalities. One or the other clearly knew each other's teaching, which I just find super fascinating how these things work out. Sometimes we read the Bible as the only document from this period, and we don't realize that there's all kinds of stuff going on. If you're curious about especially Jewish history, I think I've said this before, you should definitely look up this book. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to read. It's Josephus. I think it's called The Jewish History or The Jewish Anthology or something. There's no copyright on it, so it costs like $5 brand new on Amazon, and it's his very Jewish slanted history. But it's still really cool. He talks about Jesus. He clearly knows who Jesus is. One of the things that people will say is when people say, Jesus never happened. Jesus was made up. I would say you're more than welcome to believe Jesus isn't who he said he was, but Josephus has no interest in protecting Jesus' identity. He doesn't believe he's the Son of God, but he writes about him as a historical figure, and he writes about him in a way that the religious elite of Judaism clearly knew who he was. So he talks pretty openly about it. So it's very interesting if you're curious about reading that kind of stuff. For the sake of time, there's a question there for you if you want to take that home and ponder it a bit. I'd like to push on because there is just an incredibly cool teaching here. It's on taxes. Isn't that fun? All of you who pay once a year, you're like, I already did it, so it's not a big deal. All you quarterly payers, sorry. Here you go. Then the Pharisees went, and they plotted how to entangle him in his words. Why are they upset with him? He just told them, you're on the outside looking in, buddies, right? If you don't decide to turn, put the garment on, and show a life of fruit, then there's nothing I can do for you. And they sent their disciples to him. Underline that. What cowards send their underlings? What they've done isn't working, so who are they going to send? Their 20-year-old disciples, their 19-year-old disciples. They send the disciples to him along with the Herodians. Okay, we have to pause for a second because if you were reading this in the first century and you were Jewish especially, you just cringed. Here's why. Pharisees really don't like Sadducees. You guys remember that? They really hate Samaritans. Do you remember Samaritans? What's the deal with the Samaritans, by the way?
They just believe in the afterlife.
The Samaritans, not the Sadducees. The Samaritans were part of this group of exiled Jews who left Babylon and Assyria to go back to Jerusalem, and on their way back, they're like, we'll just stay here in this Samaritan area. They intermarried, and they basically took their Jewish faith and pagan faith and kind of blended them together. So a good example of this is Jesus at the well. Do you remember this story? And it's the Samaritan woman, but she says this well was dug by who?
Jacob.
By our father Jacob. She's like trying to find a commonality even though she's a Samaritan. So Jews hate Samaritans. The reason being is they have Jewish blood in their veins and they have basically given up their right to the inheritance of being a Jew. I would say right up there with Samaritans are Herodians. So let's talk about who these guys are. Just by their name, who do you think they are? They're Herod's Underlings, right? And Herod is called the King of the Jews, of course. But what I love is we already talked about this all the way back in chapter 1. Herod is like, calls in the Jewish experts and he's like, hey, can you tell me, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? And the joke is that the King of the Jews doesn't know anything Jewish, right? So he should know. He's the one put in charge. He's supposed to rule over them, and they hate him. Because even though he is Jewish, he knows nothing about being Jewish because he has sold out to Rome. All of his power, he's a puppet king. He has no power except for the power Rome gives him. So all of his underlings, they are well-versed in the ways of Rome. They're well-versed in how to deal with the policy and the politics and the culture of the Roman military and the Roman world. And their job is basically to try to keep Jerusalem quiet enough that the Romans won't come in and destroy them. By the way, whenever this is being written, it won't be long till they stink so bad at their job, Rome just comes and destroys it anyways. So these guys are despised. So this is what you should know. Pharisees and Herodians, when they show up and they're on the same team, something weird is going on. And I would say more than weird, something kind of daunting and nasty is happening. I would just put it this way. The only reason the Pharisees would ever mingle with the Herodians is if they have a common goal that they can both get behind, which is pretty much never. But what common goal are they rallying around now? The Pharisees hate Jesus. They want to paint him as a revolutionary who's going to stir up drama, and so they pull in the Herodians because the Herodians don't want drama. They want pay your taxes on time, don't complain, do what you're told, and hopefully they'll leave us alone. So they come to him and they say, remember their intentions are to do what? Entangle him in his words. So they want to do a gotcha. Anybody ever watch these? It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. Both sides do it to each other, and they do it on YouTube and Instagram Reels. Have you seen all these videos where it's like, gotcha? And it's like, I'm pretty sure that person didn't just give a 15-second speech. So it's clear to me that you took a speech and cut it down into something out of context and did the, you just said something dumb, and I'm going to make you look dumb. You guys know what I'm talking about? It happens all the time, and we do it to each other, and we got to stop. So they decide we're going to get him in a gotcha. And so they come to him and they say, Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Are you okay, man? Thanks. Appreciate that. One of the things I put it in the footnotes is they actually are saying something truthful, that you don't take into account appearances. The first thing I thought of is when God sent Samuel to the town of Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, and says, one of Jesse's sons is going to be the king. Do you remember the succession where he brings out like his varsity quarterback son first? And he's like looking all chiseled and handsome and smart. And what does Samuel say? Surely this has got to be the king, right? And then God says what? I don't look at outward appearances, Samuel. I look at the heart. Okay. I just heard that story in this. Okay. So this is their question. Is it lawful? This is an important question. This is a distinction. Because they're asking a question of legality. And this is in hot water. There's a lot of context going on here, and I hope that we have time to cover it. So their question is it lawful? They're trying to catch him in the same situation. This is clever. I think this is actually clever of them. Because this exact same strategy to do a gotcha, Jesus just did on them. Do you remember? It was the only time in the entire Bible where it says that they say, we don't know. What was his situation? What did he say? Yeah, what was it?
The baptism of John.
Yeah, he says, I'll answer your question if you answer mine. Here's my question. John's baptism, was it from God or was it not from God? Remember? He basically is posing a question that has how many possible answers? 2. It either is or it isn't. And the Pharisees, it says they confer with each other. They have like a little subcommittee. They chatter, and then they realize, if we say it was from God, then he's going to ask us, why did you kill him? Or why didn't you believe him? If we say it wasn't from God, this whole crowd is going to revolt because most of them came from him, right? So they're trying this exact same strategy because is it legal to pay taxes to Caesar or not? What are the 2 answers? Yes or no? I highlighted this question lawful because throughout the entire gospel, is Jesus overly concerned with this? No. What is he more concerned about? Heart, right? I would say heart, or I would say the intention, right? I think Paul picks up on this and says, hey, you can do the right thing with the wrong heart. And is that right or wrong? Still wrong, right? The theologian Augustine picks up on this in his book called The City of God. I think he wrote it 1,700 years ago now. But this is the idea. So they ask him a legal question. Now, let's talk about what's at stake. If he says, yes, it's legal to pay taxes to Caesar, what is at stake? Who gets the gotcha? The Pharisees. Why? Because what? He hasn't paid them. We're going to find out in a second he's got no money on him, which is hilarious. He's broke. Jesus is broke. That's what happens when you put Judas in charge of the money, I think. Okay, but if he says, oh yeah, it's legal to pay, then the Pharisees all of a sudden have this out of context quotation to say, he's in cahoots with the Roman government. Be careful with this guy. He's pro-Caesar. You see that? Now, if he says, no, it's not legal to pay taxes, we shouldn't pay the taxes, who gets the gotcha now? The Herodians. And what do they say? We can't have guys like this around or else we're going to have a problem on our hands, so what do we got to do? Okay, so now they're like, gotcha. There's no way out of this one unless you're Jesus. And he says this, but Jesus, aware of their heart intention, aka malice. By the way, really cool word in Greek. The word malice is actually it's an intention of the heart that's rooted in the same root word in Greek as wickedness and iniquity. All 3 share the exact same root word, which is kind of interesting. So he's aware of their wickedness. Their intentions are not pure. And he said, why put me to the test, you hypocrites? You can circle hypocrites because we're about to find out why he thinks they're hypocrites. And he thinks they're a hypocrite for a reason every Jew should already know, but they haven't taken into consideration when they try to do the gotcha. Show me the coin for the tax. Put this in the footnote. I was thinking of this. Back in chapter 6, Jesus says, you can't serve 2 masters. Remember this? You can't love both God and money. Jesus, it seems, has taken his words so seriously that he literally has no money. He doesn't even have one, we're going to find out it's a denarius. He doesn't even have one coin of a common day laborer's single day wage. So, show me the coin for the tax. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. This is the tribute tax, by the way. The tribute is a tax that you pay every single year, and it's to honor and to acknowledge that Caesar is your divine benefactor. And so out of the goodness of your heart, you are going to pay the tax that's also compelled with violence. So they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness, okay, you should definitely be circling these words. Whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him and went away. Okay, so something just happened there culturally where they're like, oh, he just did a gotcha on us. We should probably regroup before this gets ugly, right? So let's go back a few verses and talk about this. Okay, so the denarius, we've talked a lot about it. It's actually a super important coin. The denarius is not only it's minted by the Romans, so it's a Roman coin. The denarius is minted with a specific purpose, and its main purpose is that it is a single day's wage for a laborer. But that's not the only purpose. I would say this is similar to, I don't know, I feel like inflation's gone crazy. What is the most common bill that you think we all carry? I would have said ones, but like ones doesn't even get you Del Taco anymore. 20s? Okay, so it's like the common bill. I feel like when I was a kid, like my mom would drop me off at the pool, and like every kid had like a pocket full of like 4 or 5 $1 bills. That was like just super common. And so it was like you could use it for anything and everything. So the denarius is not only a single day's wage, which is a huge part of the economy, it's also a denomination that can quickly be added up to other coinage so that you can buy and sell just about anything. It also is the coin that is required by the Roman government for tax purposes. You cannot pay this tax in any other currency but a denarius. Is that interesting? So the coin we mint for a common poor person to make in one single day is also the coin we're going to take from you as a tax. Actually, we're not going to take it from you. You're going to give it to us as tribute. But if you don't, we will kill you. It's funny how these things work. Okay, so this is the coin. They hold it up. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness is on this coin? Can you think of any issues going on here? In Greek, this word is icon. It's the same word that we use for icon. Anybody grow up Catholic? What is an icon? What's that? A statue. A lot of times it's a painting of a saint's face, usually with a gold halo. You guys know what I'm talking about? I should have got a picture. This is this. Now, do you think for a Jew this might be, should be a problem? Why should this be a problem? Idolatry. Now, that's a pretty big, bold word. So the command in Exodus against idolatry actually says what? I think I wrote it. Did I write it? Oh, yeah. This is footnote 8. No one can, no, wrong one. I thought I wrote it in here, but apparently I didn't. Oh, yeah, I wrote it. It's Exodus 20, 4 through 5. I'm not sure if it's in your outline. It looks like I late added it to my own. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So if you're Jewish, are they commands or are they recommendations? They are commands. And in Judaism at this time, who is in charge of enforcing the codes of the law? The Pharisees. Now, not only do they know basically the entire Old Testament by heart, what is the first thing that they learned and every single day they repeat? The 10 Commandments, which includes this. Are you tracking with me? So here we are. Jesus is it legal to pay taxes? And he says, give me a coin. I don't carry one with me. By the way, where are they standing? They're in the temple still. Here's a coin. So what are these guys bearing in their own pockets? The idolatrous image of Caesar. And he says, just so they don't miss it, whose likeness and inscription is this? He's using the language of the commandments. And do they catch it? No, because they don't see a problem with this at all. They don't see this as in any way like a worship or idolatrous moment. They just think this is money and this is how the world works and it's business as usual. So they say it's Caesar's image. Now we're literally holding up an idolatrous icon of the Roman emperor in the Jewish temple. Should this be sending off alarm bells to people? But they don't get it. So what does he say to them? Therefore render. In Greek, the word render is a legal term that means to repay a debt. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So something in what he just said made them marvel, and then they went away with deciding they don't want to get him. Okay, so I think I put this, I know I put it in here. You guys see the image that I put some text over the top of in your outline? This right here is the exact coin. That is it. You can go on eBay right now. This was so minted. These denarius were minted in such high quantity that you can go on eBay and buy one. I saw one. It's in really poor quality, but it's the exact same coin. You can get it for like $400 or $500, which is a lot of money, but still kind of cool to be able to hold the exact coin that Jesus is holding, or the exact type of coin. And this is it. And on the front, right there, is Tiberius Caesar. And this is what it says on the front. Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. What does it mean to be the son of the divine Augustus? Augustus Caesar is who?
Consider God.
Yeah, he is the one who started all this, right? He is considered God. And so to be the son of him is, Tiberius Caesar is calling himself what on the front of the coin? Son of God. Okay, so it's not just the idol. It's not just the graven image. Jesus also asks, what's the inscription on it, you dummies? It says it. On the back, it says greatest or highest priest. Wow. That's pretty bold, right? So this is the front. I don't have to write it. You guys have it in your outline. So holding up this coin. And Jesus says, as he's holding up the coin, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Can there be more than one God in Jesus' Jewish view and in the Pharisees' view? There's only one God. This is a monotheistic religion, right? So if Jesus holds up a coin that says, Son of God, Tiberius Caesar, Son of God on it, and says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's, what is he saying? Caesar is not God. But did he say that? Did he just like blatantly say it? Okay, you had to interpret it a little bit to get there, right? So, do the Herodians know what he just said? But can they quote him out of context in a way that gotcha? Not really. That's their response. So the Herodians, when they heard it, they marveled and they left him and went away. Now let's talk about what the Pharisees just heard. What did the Pharisees just hear? The conviction sword, right? What did Jesus just say to them? You are idolaters. We're standing in the temple and you're holding an image which is forbidden by the 10 Commandments. I wish Jesus would have said what he says before. Have you not read? And then quoted the 10 Commandments. That would have been like a major burn. But he doesn't do that. Okay, so he says, Caesar is not God. the Herodians are like, oh man, this guy can't be around. This is not going to be good. He can't be walking around saying that. We're allowed to believe that as Jews, but we're not allowed to say that out loud, right? Okay. For the Pharisees, what he just said to them is, you are idolatrous. You have lost sight of what your calling is to a degree that you're selling and paying taxes in a way that is against the very core of who you are as people, and you're letting it slide. I wrote this in my outline. I think this is at the core of it. I think if I was preaching it, I think this is where I would land. I think to pay the debt. Because that's what he says. He says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God. So he's saying there is a debt to be paid to Caesar, and there is a debt to be paid to God. What is the debt to be paid to Caesar? The taxes. Yeah. The taxes with his image. How prideful and arrogant do you have to be to fill your treasury up with coins that have your face on them? Right? So Jesus says, render unto Caesar, what's your debt to him? Whatever they say. Give him back the coins that already have his face on them. That's what he gets. Render unto God what is God's. Now this is kind of a hop, skip, and a jump. What has God's image on it? Why are we not to make graven images? We are made in his image. We are the image bearers. The reason you don't draw or paint or make sculptures and pretend that this is the image of God is because you are. We are made in the image of God. And so what is our debt to him that we pay? We give back to him what is made in his image, which is what? We give him back us. And we give him the fruit of our lives. Right? That's our debt. And I think what just happened is Jesus just did like a couple jabs to the Herodians and then an uppercut to the Pharisees. And spiritually there's conviction, there's anger, right? Have you ever been spiritually corrected in a way that immediately made your face turn red and you're angry about it? Maybe you even know it's true and you know it's right, but you just are like burning and you need some time to think it out. I think maybe that's what's happened. They marveled and went away. Why do they marvel? They're baffled that they were positive they were about to have certain success, and he still got out of it, right? The Herodians can't charge him with forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, right? He literally said, pay him his taxes. And the Pharisees can't get him as a conspirator to Rome, because he just pointed out something super obvious that they completely overlooked, and that's that they're holding graven images in the temple. It's a super powerful message. It is just about 7:30. Are there any questions or comments tonight as we wrap up? Yes.
I have a question about the wedding garment. How do we know that they're given out? Maybe that man couldn't afford them.
The host, part of his hospitality is that he buys them and he gives them to the guests.
Does he know what sizes to them?
I think a lot of them are robes, so I'd imagine it's like close to a one-size-fits-all. Yeah. Actually, to this day, Hasidic Jews, even in like places like New York, still get a white wedding garment given to them by their host, which is kind of interesting. I read that this kind of adds an element, a dimension. I think the Jewish word for a wedding is something like simcha or something like that, and it means the very joyous occasion. So when you say the very joyous occasion, everyone in the culture knows, oh, that's a wedding. That's how central a wedding is to the entire culture, which I think is really cool. Any other questions or comments? Cool. Next week, Chester will be here bringing the next half of chapter 22. I'm not going anywhere. I'll just get to sit and learn with you guys. But I would like to pray for us, and then we'll dismiss from here. And as always, you're welcome to linger, socialize, hang out, pray, as long as you want. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the way that it just kind of brings life to us. It brings excitement. Thank you that there's so much depth. This, one theologian has said it's deep enough that the experienced divers can't find the bottom, and it's safe enough for children to swim in the shallows. So we're grateful for that. But we ask, beyond just learning cool things, we ask that maybe in the coming days we would just be surprised by how your word tonight applies to our lives. Would you put it in play? Would you put us in conversations where these things actually matter? And would we remember that you are calling us to turn our whole selves over to you as made in your image? So would you help us to bear fruit? Would you help us to resist the temptation to judge others or look at other people's fruit? And would we really just dive deeply into who you are? We love you. We give you this night, and we ask that you would go before us. Amen. Amen. Thank you for coming. Cue the music.
Thank you.